Good morning to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our hurricane slash tropical weather outlook video. Today is June 5th, 2024, a Wednesday. Today we're going to go over European seasonal guidance for June, which has actually been released not long ago. We're going to go over it in detail, go over what it means for the hurricane season, or basically what we already know about the hurricane season. And of course, we're going to take a look at current conditions in the tropical Atlantic and Pacific. So with that being said, thanks for joining us. Glad to have you along. Let's get started. First off, with a look at the National Hurricane Center map, just to see what's going on over the next week. And the National Hurricane Center expects nothing, no areas tagged, nor is there anything within the immediate future to worry about in terms of development. And the same goes for the Eastern Pacific. And why not take a look at the Central Pacific? Because the Central Pacific is also part of our general area as well. It's generally part of the Eastern Pacific Basin. Sometimes, too, we take a look at the Central Pacific for tracking interests. And even then, there's nothing then occurring there as well. So in general, the Western Hemisphere remains quiet, and it looks like that, at least it looks like it'll remain that way for the time being. And we could take a look at the satellite image to show just that. Nothing significant, nice and quiet across the Atlantic. You could see, though, lots of convective activity and lots of cloud cover over the southwestern Atlantic. And I'll show you the precipitable moisture in just a bit, but there's a lot of moisture being drawn up from the Caribbean. And at least when it comes to impacts in terms of, when we typically look at tropical cyclones with heavy rain and gusty winds, this is probably what the Caribbean islands are dealing with right now. Although the main difference is it's not a tropical cyclone, it's just convective thunderstorms bringing gusty winds and heavy rains across portions of the Bahamas and all the northern islands. And even with these tropical waves, too, as they move in, they'll also bring gusty conditions, especially to the southern islands. So it's not like they're not getting nothing, they're getting rain. It's just in terms of tropical development right now, it doesn't seem like there will be much occurring at all. And a good way to take a look at, just the general moisture content of the Atlantic. Another good map that I like to look at, the total precipitable water. And yeah, you can see that there's a lot of moisture in the Caribbean right now. Lots of rain falling, and you could even take a look at how the precipitable water looks like when it comes to identifying tropical waves. You could probably see it's picking out one tropical wave that's, I guess, in the general central and eastern Atlantic. And you could pick out these tropical waves using precipitable water because these tropical waves come with moisture. Well, most of the time. Sometimes we have dry waves, but most of the time, tropical waves tend to come with gusty winds and heavy rains, just like what we would see in weaker tropical systems. The only difference is that they're just not tropical, but they're still getting rain. They're still getting all the rainfall they need. But it definitely looks like over the next several weeks, all of this precipitable water will probably at least once, or at least we can assume, will probably come from some sort of tropical system that eventually develops in the central and western Atlantic. As of right now, though, nothing is of any crazy concern. It just looks like, in terms of tropical development, things will remain quiet. And I'll take a look at that too with the current GFS. Let's zoom it out to the next week or so. Not much going on. You can even see actually right now the reflection of some activity that is going on in the Caribbean. All this area of vorticity, and you actually see that there's a trough to the north. So there's probably a front somewhere in here, and from that we're probably seeing lots of rain across the Caribbean. But other than that, in terms of actual tropical development over the next week or so, you do see, though, that even if there's not anything concrete expected, the GFS is starting to show signs, as we would expect, that it looks like something might get going, and this is around June 11th, and as we go out into the first 7 days time frame, we start getting to June 12th, and this is starting to get to that mid-June time frame when a lot of the models expect this general area of the Atlantic will become favorable potentially for our season's first action. And you can actually see that. Look at the vorticity map. Notice how much vorticity begins to show up in the general western Atlantic right around the 7 day mark. So probably indicative of some sort of drier monsoonal setup occurring as we typically see in the early season when we get a favorable sort of pattern in this area. We call it the Central American Gyre. And you could see, and we'll actually zoom it out in time, not too much though. You could actually see right over Central America, we start getting this very broad sort of cyclonic lower level pattern. And then the question after that will be whether or not it actually develops and actually consolidates into a nameable system in the Atlantic, one. And number two, the question also still remains whether or not this will actually be something that we're going to talk about once we get to the time frame, which, at least in the GFS, it seems like this is showing up around June 12th or June 13th. That is still a week away, and trust me, in the hurricane tracking world, that is still long ways in terms of tracking in real time. But it does make sense if you think about it in the perspective that all the models expected that around this time conditions would be more favorable for development. And now that's what we're starting to see reflected in the models, at least on the GFS. We still have other models to pick up though, but I'm pretty sure over the next several days and weeks, eventually all the models will begin to pick up on something occurring. But I believe the foundation is there. It's just a matter of time. Probably within the next 2 or so weeks, we'll get something to occur in the Atlantic as a whole. Talking about though, kind of zooming out or widening our time frame, if you will, to the entire hurricane season, not just over the next several weeks. This is kind of more like interseasonal. This is what we're talking about now with the European charts that have actually been released today for June. This is more of a several months seasonal thing. And this is something that we actually have a lot more confidence in, especially because we've all been talking about this for the last several months now. And now we're here in hurricane season on June with the June European seasonal guidance. And with what they're forecasting still remains to be the same thing that we've been saying since the winter, basically. The latest European guidance for June in the Atlantic, at least in terms of tropical storm frequency, it is at 21 named storms. How does that compare to what it showed last month? Last month, that actually showed it a little bit higher. We were at 22, almost 23 named storms. It's 22.8, so you round that up to 23 in terms of named storm activity in the Atlantic for June, or at least for the whole season. And in June, they're down to 21. But the main bottom line is that they're still over the 20 range, and that is still very active in and of itself, and it still aligns with what all the other forecasts have for this season. So generally, right around the same that they forecast from May to June. What about the hurricane frequency? They're at 11. The average is 7.2. What did they show last month? I guess a little bit more. Maybe there's a slight downtrend in the European from last month to this month, or maybe just a correction. Maybe they were really aggressive last month, and maybe they're trying to correct to show a little bit more of a, I guess you could say, more reasonable scenario, even though I think even 13 hurricanes is because this is the hurricane frequency they had in the Atlantic last month, almost 13 at 12.8. This month is at 11. It's still a lot though. Once again, the average is 7, so the fact that we're still expecting around the 11 to 13 range is much above normal. And I think the biggest takeaway though, and actually the thing that has not changed since last month, is the amount of ACE expected. That is still at a full 2 points, which is, I guess, double the normal, which the normal represented here, at least that's what the climate mean is in terms of accumulated cyclone energy. It is 1 point. And the European forecasts 2 points, which in actuality, I think some people talked about what it actually translates to on Twitter, and it's over 200 ACE points in actuality. But they show, again, just generally, the main takeaway from this is that the European expects a much above normal hurricane season for the Atlantic this year. And once again, how does that compare to what they showed in May? It's not different at all. In fact, it's not even changed one single bit. So I think the confidence is generally there from the Europeans still that conditions are very favorable. Not just in terms of what they forecast in terms of actual numbers, But let's even take a look at what they show atmospherically, what the atmospheric setup is for the season. And I just want to bring you to August, September, October, because that is the peak. And this is the most likely level of sea level pressures across the Atlantic. And notice where all this blue is. This represents that the European thinks that we will have well below normal sea level pressures in the atmosphere by the time we get to the peak season. And notice where all of this is concentrated in the deep tropics of the Atlantic. So that means much below normal sea level pressures in the deep tropics of the Atlantic. Very favorable. Obviously, it falls in line with what we think for an active hurricane season. And then take a look at the Pacific in stark contrast. My God, really, the Pacific is really going to be shut off, I guess, this year. And you could even see the forecast from the European. They show both basins, the eastern and the western Pacific, being below normal. So I guess the Atlantic will really carry this year if you take a look at this graph alone. And not even just that, look at the precipitation too. This is from July, August, September. Let me bring it to the peak season. I like to keep it at the peak season, and since that's generally our benchmark, if you will, in terms of watching activity. It's generally around the peak where we look at the activity the most, because it's the peak of the hurricane season, and that is, once again, August, September, October, as represented by this here. But anyways, let's just get straight to the point. Notice where all these precipitation anomalies are. Once again, this is something that all of the models been showing. Very increased, elevated precipitation anomalies all throughout the deep tropics of the Atlantic. And this is from this month, but about last month. Let me actually set this to August, September, October. Basically no change. They're still showing very aggressive on, especially around the Western Atlantic and the Caribbean, which says quite a bit. I think it's probably because they show La Nina. Probably, or they're at least probably reflecting the La Nina that is expected in the Pacific, that they're really favorable in terms of conditions in the Caribbean. But that is to be expected in a La Nina. But the general takeaway overall is that atmospherically, the European, once again, buying into the idea, just like all the other climate models are, that atmospherically the Atlantic will be very favorable. And in terms of what the raw actual numbers of the European forecasts, it still reflects that we still have 20 plus named storms by the European, and ACE that is well above normal, and that basically continues to allude, I should say. Well, I mean, it aligns with the fact, and it alludes to the fact that this year will be an active hurricane season. And we're in June now. We're at the start of hurricane season, and the models are still indicating what they showed in December when everybody was questioning whether or not this year could potentially be a really big season. And now that it's upon us, it's just a matter to see whether or not these forecasts actually verify, though. I can tell you they probably will to some extent, unless we have some sort of huge upset this season, which hopefully so. Hopefully we don't get, the crazy forecasts that some people are going. I think maybe some of those forecasts that some people have may be, a little extreme, as there always is, unless they're maybe right. If you get what I mean, especially with those really high-end forecasts that people released last month and even throughout April as well. But maybe they might be onto something. I mean, maybe they could be, especially with the European guidance, and we looked at the CANTIP several days ago. They all continue to allude to the same exact fact that the Atlantic is atmospherically primed and is ready for development and for a very active hurricane season this year. And maybe we might break records this year. Who knows? But it definitely looks favorable for it, or at least for something much above normal, that is for sure. With that being said, though, not much else to talk about, so I'm going to end it off here. Thanks for watching. If you like what you saw today, I encourage you, like, comment, subscribe, share your thoughts on the climate models as well. Share your thoughts about hurricane season. We'd really like to hear from you. Kind of interact in the comments as well. I really like to do that, so please feel free to comment your thoughts and your opinions, and I'll definitely respond back. If you have any questions for me as well, shoot them in the comments. I will respond back. I try my best to keep, or at least I try to respond back anyways. With that being said, thanks for watching. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to all of you. Have a blessed day, a safe one, and we'll talk again tomorrow.